Mutts fans, our next guest is a TSN hockey insider with TSN. You can also find him on the Ray and Dregs podcast with Ray Ferraro. We'd like to welcome back to the 2 Mutts podcast, Darren Dreger. Dregs, how's it going?
Yeah, I'm doing well. It's starting to heat up here. Obviously, it's gone to a stage that I enjoy the most in doing what I do. In that, you move from speculation and all the wild stuff that's out there to actually being able to more or less identify, what the needs are of certain teams, who are the buyers, who are the sellers, how close clubs are coming to making deals. So it always drives James Duthie crazy because we see the names like Horvat and Tarasenko go, and then we know we've got Chychrun waiting in the wings and the Vladdy Gavrikov for the Columbus Blue Jackets, and he's like, "Can we not hold these pieces until March 3rd?" Do people not realize we're doing like 14 hours of live TV? But I don't know. I mean, we sit there as hockey insiders, and we're almost oblivious to the television that's going on because we're just trying to work our phones here, right? But for me, it's all about the chase and the execution, and we're chasing a lot this week. There's a lot going on, so it's a good time of year.
Yeah, it is. It's always fun, always interesting, and the fans love the content for sure. They like to see what's going on. So I guess we'll kind of start here with the LA Kings. They've kind of had some big wins here lately, Dregs, and they're kind of shaping up for a good playoff run again, and a little bit of a longer one than they had last year. I know Jacob Chychrun's name has been around, but is there any update on Jacob Chychrun, LA Kings, and what kind of more pieces do you think the LA Kings are going to add here as the deadline approaches?
It's an excellent question. We know that the interest in Jake Chychrun from Rob Blake and the Los Angeles Kings has been persistent. Maybe getting to a place of deal fatigue, like you've been banging your head trying to make this deal with Arizona, and it just doesn't seem to happen, clearly. But you got to keep your eye on the prize, as the old cliche goes, and Jake Chychrun would be a nice fit for the LA Kings. And you look at the prospects and the depth that the LA Kings have in that department. We can envision how they would pull that off. But I remember having a conversation with Rob Blake on the podcast early in the season. And, you look at the pieces that they still have. I think they've done a nice job of transitioning that team. And again, you've got guys like Brandt Clark coming. I mean, there's some interesting pieces in that balance of youth here. But they've got Jonathan Quick in goal. Even though their goaltending has been sketchy when Quick was on the sidelines, that became an area of concern, if not need, for LA. And you've got Anze Kopitar, who's still a star forward up front. Blake feels a certain level of responsibility to give those young guys, those older guys, I should say, an opportunity to win again. And on that podcast early in the season, he said, we're big game hunting. So could that be, a pivotal piece up front, like a Patty Kane? Could it be Jake Chychrun has been rumored for so long? Yeah, it could be all of those things. We keep waiting for a little bit of traction in this regard. Instead, we keep spinning with the wheel of speculation.
Yeah. I will. Hopefully something shapes up soon. We just had O-Dog on the other day, and then he was on his show later that day, and he goes, if Jacob Chychrun doesn't get traded by the end of the deadline, he's like, I'm going to Arizona myself to pick him up and get him out of there. So, thought that was interesting for sure. Where do things stand with the Toronto Maple Leafs right now, and how all in do you think Kyle Dubas will be going into the deadline here, Dregs?
Yeah, I'm careful not to qualify Dubas and the Leafs as being an all-in team. Is he willing to be aggressive? There's no question about that. And, again, no different than what I just said about Los Angeles. I don't think Toronto gets enough credit for having the pieces, the assets, either be it draft picks or prospects that they could include. Matthew Nyes, who plays in the NCAA, is a name that's been out there for a bit. I don't think Toronto wants to trade him. Could he be included? Yeah, in the right deal, he could be included. So that's why you've got the rumors and the linking of the Toronto Maple Leafs to San Jose with Timo Meier, Ivan Barbashev with the St. Louis Blues, because that's an area of need. Start of the year, I think most of us believed that Toronto would be looking to bolster their blue line. Then they went through injury issues with Morgan Riley and TJ Brody. And what they learned is that Timothy Liljegren and Rasmus Sandin were ready to take that next step. I think their blue line's pretty solid. You can always make it better. So if the right player pops into the market and Dubas sees it as an upgrade, well, of course he's going to move on that, especially if he doesn't have the perfect fit up front. But the need is on the wing for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Timo Meier feels like a little too aggressive, and then you do have to look at the future. And look, I'm intrigued by it because even though Timo Meier is a $10 million qualifying offer, if you're a team like Toronto, maybe you use him for the run here, right? And then you can still trade that asset. And Timo Meier would be a player of value because he's a restricted free agent at the end of the season. So it's not impossible. But I look at Barbashev and I look at some of the other potentially available wingers. And I haven't even mentioned Patrick Kane. Here's a fascinating scenario here, right? And it's one that we've got to work on in the days ahead. And Chris Johnson talked about this on Insider Trading. Like, a decision has to come from Kane and Taves, and that's probably in the next 5 to 7, 8 days. Just to allow Kyle Davidson in Chicago some wiggle room to work his magic on the trade front. What if Patrick Kane said, "Well, I'm only willing to go to Toronto"? Yeah. Well, it gets very complicated, and it's not out of the realm of possibility. But then what do you do if you're Dubas? Just because a superstar player like Patrick Kane says, "Well, I'm only going to Toronto," doesn't mean that the Maple Leafs are willing to move heaven and earth to get that player. But it's a delicate one when you look at the history of Patrick Kane. He's hockey royalty with 3 Stanley Cups, and Austin Matthews was talking about him. I mean, Matthews absolutely worships Patrick Kane. So it could get delicate. It's one of the more salacious storylines that intrigues me. So I don't know if that qualifies Josh for being all in from Toronto's perspective, but there's a willingness, there's an appetite to be aggressive for sure.
Yeah, I definitely think so. And they kind of talked about it on Overdrive 2 yesterday and how intriguing that could look. And Jamie here, who I'm going to pass the puck to, is a big Blackhawks fan. He's a diehard fan. It's a good segue because he did want to kind of touch a little bit more on that. So Jamie, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I was reading that last night, Dregs, about Kane. That Toronto is now on the docket. I don't know how long it's been there, but I think he got a little hurt by Tarasenko going to the Rangers. So let's flip over here. I want to come hometown here, living in Edmonton now, and as we know, God's team is here in the Oilers. What do you see it a reality that Karlsson comes here, and if not, who do we see coming to help on this blue line?
Well, I mentioned 2 of them. One of them in Gavrikov. I know that Kenny Holland has had some interest in Chychrun. They just don't see Jake Chychrun as being the perfect fit for, again, the amount that has to go out to acquire him. What they would like is the cap certainty, and that makes things easier financially for the Oilers. Gavrikov is a player of interest, but we also know that Kenny Holland has had consistent interest in Erik Karlsson with the San Jose Sharks. An enormous task to try and acquire him for all the reasons that we know. Number one, are the pieces there that Edmonton is going to have to give out? Well, we don't know that. Are we convinced that Erik Karlsson is going to waive in season to go to Edmonton? I'm not sure we know that. He probably would, to be on that power play with McDavid and Draisaitl. I mean, if you want to win, it makes sense that you'd want to play with 2 of the best players on the planet. But the money is what makes it a significant, if not even unattainable, exercise for Holland, because he's going to need the San Jose Sharks to retain a ton of money. And I don't know that 40 or 50% gets it done. And then you get into a real delicate territory because Mike Grier doesn't have to move Erik Karlsson at the deadline or before. He doesn't have to. He's got him under contract. And the flexibility in the financial system of the NHL, it does get a little bit more loose in the offseason because contracts are expiring, all of those things. You don't have the pressure of the playoffs looming and all of that. And maybe that's a good fit for Eric's family as well. So they've got the full lay of the land. Maybe opportunities are presented in the offseason for Erik Karlsson and his family that aren't being presented right now. But I think this is Holland, Jamie. starting at the top of the food chain with Erik Karlsson and just saying, all right, well, let's shoot for the moon here. And if we know we can't get him, then we're going to go to Columbus and we're going to take a hard look at Vladdy Gavrikov. Then we're going back to the Montreal Canadiens to see if Joel Edmondson is the right fit, and on it goes. This is just an experienced general manager circling back on conversations that he's already had.
Yeah. Cycling back to what we were just talking about, Patrick Kane. We know Tarasenko went to the Rangers, but how real are the Rangers at this point?
Yeah, well, I like their team. You look at their goaltending, which to a degree is underperformed when you compare to what Shesterkin was doing last year, but it's still elite. Who's kidding who? And, they'll be motivated as they close in on the latter part of the second half of the season, get ready for the playoffs and all of that. Chris Drury was wise in diving in on Tarasenko the way he did as early as he did. And we kind of touched on it. He wasn't willing to wait. He couldn't miss. He knew he had to add a scoring piece, and he gets that in Tarasenko. But there's still some opportunity here for Drury to add another piece. We've all been reading online, the possibility of how they could make Kane work. Kane put pressure on the New York Rangers by coming out and saying what he said, his disappointment over the Tarasenko trade, right? Because New York was clearly a target for Patrick Kane. How do you make that work? Well, I can guarantee you that Chris Drury has had conversations with Kyle Davidson about how creative they might get. And New York does have, I would say, some intriguing pieces that might work. It just feels like maybe too big of a challenge, but if it's not Patty Kane, maybe it's somebody else. The appetite in New York with the New York Rangers to not just nibble at a Stanley Cup contention, but to actually go in there as deep as they might is real, and it is significant. I don't think the Rangers are done on the trade front.
Yeah, I agree. Now, before I cycle this back into the corner to Philly cheesesteak, answer me this just to put my mind at ease, because I'm not sleeping at night with the prospect of my guys leaving that team. What are the odds that either Patty or Jonathan leave the Hawks, or one or the other, or both?
I think there's a good chance, but I'm hedging here a little bit, man, because you've got two iconic pieces, and you're a diehard Hawks fan, and so we can feel the disappointment and the fact that an era is about to shift here for the Chicago Blackhawks. I'm not convinced it's going to happen that both will be traded. There's some speculation on whether Jonathan Toews really wants to do it. Is he willing maybe to look at the offseason and, again, the bevy of choices that he might have as an unrestricted free agent? I think that there's an appetite, though, from both to recognize that there's something they can do for the Chicago Blackhawks. So the legacy could be not just the 3 Stanley Cups, for everything that they've done for the community in Chicago and all of that, but their final piece is to give the organization something that they can work on to build a bigger, a better, a brighter future. And I would think that means something to Kane, and I would hope that it means a lot to Jonathan Toews, the captain of the Chicago Blackhawks. So for those reasons, emotionally, I want to go back to saying it's more likely they get traded. But guys, we're not talking about a bidding war for Kane and Toews. We're not. I mean, if they were willing to go to the best fit, or the best fit for return for the Chicago Blackhawks, well, now you've got probably 15 teams that are intrigued by adding 2 significant pieces like that. But in fairness to Kane and Toews, Paprasson, who again has to drill and nail this thing down, is probably going to give Kyle Davidson a list of 1 or 2 teams each, right? And Davidson probably has that list. It just hasn't been etched in stone. This is where he wants to go. And, then that kind of lessens what you're going to get back. But for that reason, just the history, the legacy, everything that has gone into those 2 careers in Chicago, maybe this is their final farewell and their opportunity to give back one more time.
Yeah. Appreciate it, Dregs. Philly.
Yeah.
So I have the task of talking about the Calgary Flames, and on this podcast, I'm on repeat all the time about their season.
Yeah.
It's Brad Tree Living's final year here in Calgary.
Yeah.
So my question is like, what can Brad do, or maybe even better, like what should Brad do? Because personally, as a Flames fan, I don't know if I'm all in on giving up assets at this point.
Yeah, I hear you. And, I'm sure that keeps Treliving awake at night too, right? I think he felt like he not only made the best of a bad situation, but overachieved in the summer. It gets done a sandwich and has to make work without Johnny Gaudreau, sorry, turned into Huberdeau, obviously. But then Huberdeau goes to market, and now he's got to move Matthew Tkachuk, ends up getting Huberdeau and Weegar back. And I think all of us went, well, I'll tell you what, that is some top-notch managing right there, right? I mean, you turn that bad situation into a good situation. It hasn't worked out, though. It really hasn't, at least not yet. Change isn't for everybody. And when you look at Huberdeau, talk about a significant change, right? Not just uprooting, but then, having to play in a completely different conference for a head coach, unlike any head coach that Jonathan Huberdeau has ever had to play for, and that is Daryl Sutter. So it's been a disappointing year for Jonathan Huberdeau. Mackenzie Weegar, I think he's been a good piece. Nazem Kadri signing him. Kadri had a career year with an unbelievable Colorado Avalanche team. He doesn't have the same pieces in Calgary, but I think they're getting fair value out of Nazem Kadri. I do. I mean, he's a gritty player. So I don't think that there's any buyer remorse there. But then you get some of the intangibles that you can't quite figure out. Why haven't these pieces fit in? Treliving has been looking for an ad up front, a top 6, top 9 forward, probably back to the offseason. And there's been all kinds of speculation. Could it be Brock Besser from Vancouver? What about Josh Anderson with the Montreal Canadiens? Well, Treliving's love affair with Josh Anderson goes all the way back to the Columbus Blue Jackets pre-Montreal. But is he grasping, to your point, at this stage in pushing out some of those good, young, talented assets which represent the future in chasing something that maybe isn't there? And we haven't even talked about goaltending. I mean, above average goaltending can solve a lot of problems and mask a lot of areas of concern. And they just haven't got that. They have not got that from Jacob Markstrom and their goaltending in general. So this is going to be a tough trade deadline, I think, for Treliving, just trying to answer all of those questions and whether or not they should be all in or he worries less. He's not worried about his future as general manager. He's not. That ship has sailed. He's been there, done that. He'll worry about it at the end of the year. But he is the caretaker of the future of the Calgary Flames as we have this conversation now. And I know he takes that responsibility very seriously.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll hit Bosco back door here for the tap in.
We'll finish up on the Penguins. Dregs, obviously a big win last night against the San Jose Sharks. It's a bit of a tough trip for them out west here in versus the California teams. But thoughts on what can happen here with the Pens going forward. And obviously I think the goaltending is the biggest concern at times. It's just getting those guys to stay healthy and getting the saves. Where do things go with the Pens going into the trade deadline?
Yeah, I'm with you on that. But then I'm reminded of conversations I had with Penguins management, when Ron Hextall took over as general manager of the Penguins. I think most of us thought that, well, the first area he's going to address is goaltending. Can you be sure that Tristan Jarry is going to be able to carry the load here? And then Tristan Jarry, under the leadership of Ron Hextall, just came into his own and proved very quickly that they didn't have a goaltending concern at all. This year, that concern has resurfaced, not because of bad play, but because, as you identified, just unlucky injuries. So are they willing to roll the dice, or, is Hexie going to have to get real aggressive? We mentioned LA earlier in the podcast, and, every time I ask the LA Kings about a goalie upgrade, I'm told, no, we're okay with that. Every time I ask the Toronto Maple Leafs, do they feel like that's an area? Nope, goalie depth isn't a problem. So I think that Hextall believes that if they can stay healthy, they're fine. That doesn't mean that you don't go out and acquire some form of experience. And there are some experienced goalies out there, like Thomas Greiss is a goalie that comes to mind based on contract and affordability. Pittsburgh is an interesting team, because who can envision this team qualifying for the playoffs if they're healthy and actually doing some damage, making some noise in the postseason? The slate starts clean, and off they go. They just need to nail down a playoff spot, and they look good right now. They do. The Washington Capitals are in a bit of a struggle, and then you look at some of the other teams in the Eastern Conference that are on the outside, kind of trying to claw their way back in. And that includes Florida. The Islanders struggling right now. Buffalo's taking it on the chin a couple of times. So I believe Pittsburgh is going to add something. I've heard that they're in the market for a defenseman. Maybe they dabble a little bit with some depth up front, but I'm not so sure on goaltending, outside of maybe an insurance policy. However, we don't know. Like, what's Anaheim going to do moving forward, right? Like, the Ducks are one of those teams that Vejmelka and the Arizona Coyotes, I mean, those are teams that shouldn't have interest in winning, not for the next couple of years. Their interest has to be on Connor Bedard in the June 23 draft. That's where their interest has to be. So if a quality piece like that actually makes its way into market, then maybe all bets are off with Pittsburgh and some of these other teams with questionable goaltending.
Yeah, John Gibson's a name that always comes back in my mind.
Always
to the Penguins, and he's from the area, and he's got some term left. But if the Ducks could eat some of that or whatever, we'll see what happens there for sure. So, thanks, Dregs, for joining us. I know you and I have chatted a few times here just about what's going on in the mental health side of things in the world.
Yeah,
we're always in challenging times, and for people listening to this today, these are why we do these podcasts, is to kind of take your mind off things and ease. And I know you guys almost fans live and die by every goal, but what you do for mental health, Dregs, and everything at Bell Media, we really appreciate it here, and I know our fans do too. So thank you so much.
It's always a pleasure joining you guys. And look, I mean, based on your guest list, not just of late, I mean, with the O-Dog and the premier guest list that you have, how could I possibly say no? So I look forward to the next time we meet.
Yeah, this is number 7 for you. So you keep on creeping up there. So it's beautiful, and we're grateful and thankful, and all the best to you. And hopefully you get some rest here. I know things will be busy, but all the best to you and your family, Dregs. All
right, guys, enjoy the deadline.
Welcome back to the 2 Months Podcast, presented by BioSteel. I'm your host, Joshua Marshall. I'm with my co-host tonight. We got Phil Stockley. Phil, how's it going?
Doing pretty good. Another bright and early.
Here, we'll redo that again.
What's that?
We'll redo that again. So,
okay. Just trash that other one, eh?
Yeah. I didn't like how I did that. So, welcome back to the 2 Months Podcast, presented by BioSteel. I'm your host, Joshua Marshall. Early this morning, I'm with my co-host Phil Stockley. Phil, how's it going?
Doing pretty good. Really good interview this morning. So I'll let you break it to people who it is. So
it was Darren Dreger, TSN Hockey Insider. This is the 7th time he's joined us. So really appreciate Dregs taking the time to chime in and go down some NHL conversations. Obviously, it's a big time of the year with trade center coming up and creeping up pretty close. Every day gets closer and closer, and there's more names being taken off the list because some teams are jumping ahead of it. But this is a really good interview with Dregs. Your thoughts, Phil, before we jump to it. We don't want to kind of ramble on any longer. Everyone's here to listen to Dregs, what he has to say, but your kind of thoughts on the interview.
Well, this guy's like, this is his like busy time of the year, and just the fact that he took, I know it's a short one, it's only 20-25 minutes, but just a lot of information in that short time. And the guy was just like go. Like it was like an information overload. I know for sure I'm gonna have to go back and re-listen to this one a couple of times to catch everything he said, because I feel like everything he gave us was just gold. So good. Really appreciate the time. Like I said earlier, like he's just such a busy guy, and just the fact that he gave us this time right now, really, really special.
Yeah, for sure. It's been this is the first time we've had him back on this year, but he's as I said, he's joined us several times in the past, and it's always intriguing and great when we get Dregs on, and he brings a lot to the table, right? He's probably the best insider in the game, and he's very well connected, as everyone knows, and his podcast with Ray Ferraro is an amazing podcast too. So there's a lot of different ways you can hear him. And sometimes he's on Rashog and Pierre LeBrunt on their Got Your Back podcast as well too. So it's always good to kind of get that. And we appreciate his time. And it's very grateful for the extra few minutes that he was able to give us today, knowing that he's got some meetings and a lot going on too. But anything else you want to add there, Philly, before we jump to the interview?
Like I said, just enjoy the interview and just be ready for a lot of information in a short period of time.
Exactly. So, all right, without further ado, we'll throw to our interview with TSN Hockey Insider, Darren Dreger.